Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Reddit Quickie from the subreddit HFY, called Billy Bob Space Trucker Chapter 33, written by Regal Legal. The link to the original will be down below, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. Lieutenant Commander Lewis scratched his chin as he looked around the assembled Xenos. The ship he was on was bigger than his by a great deal. His Bouncer-class heavy escort had a crew of 50, which is why he wasn't even a full commander, and yet commanded a ship. But here he was on a Xeno ship that needed a crew of around 1,000, and they'd surrendered to him. When the 3 Kitian systems had surrendered to the first scout ship that jumped into range, the brass had assumed that it was a fluke. Just a bunch of terrified colonists who didn't understand that the scout ships weren't a sign of a large invasion force. But now, 15 US Marines were occupying 3 whole planets. So they figured that they would send a few ships out this way to scout the kitchen systems a bit more and see what was going on. He'd been chosen since the Longhorn convoys didn't need an escort, and his ship class was in a bit of an odd spot for the current war. When he jumped into a slightly more developed kitchen system, he found a ship his computer wanted to classify as a heavy battlecruiser or a light dreadnought already within range. Assuming the worst, he began to fire upon the ship and figured if worst came to worst, he'd sacrifice his ship and drive it into the bridge and take out their wall for a while. Instead, he hadn't even begun true combat actions when they surrendered, having never fired a shot. Now that he and his 15 Marines in his command were standing on the Xeno capital ship's hangar looking out at around 200 officers, most of them were Kitchens, which he had expected since there were kitchen space. What he hadn't expected was a dozen or so space hamsters, and he sure as hell didn't expect them to be wearing top hats, or fancy military uniforms that looked straight out of the 1800s, with mutton chops, and sashes, and outrageous-looking medals, except worn by space hamsters. The Kitchens were humanoid cat people as far as they was concerned, but not the sort of vicious space predators as he expected cats in space to be. These were all between 4 and 5 feet tall, and more of the house cat variety. From when he understood the ship had been joint project between the 2 species. But as he looked around the hangar, it didn't seem like either race was going to be the sort after shipbuilders anytime soon. It was space-worthy, but he wasn't sure that he'd take it into combat. He could see the areas where they'd patched electrical panels already, and in a few places things didn't even look like even or level. And he figured if they didn't look right to the naked eye, they must be really messed up to actual measurements. And this was the hangar. It was supposed to be the big open area for smaller ships to dock. If they messed that up, what was the engine room or bridge like? Not to mention, he hated the design in general. Shrugging it off, he looked at his tech that was setting up a projector, who finally nodded and gave him the thumbs up. He coughed for a moment and then tapped on the mic that he'd been given as everyone momentarily groaned and shied away from the feedback noise until the tech got it corrected. All right. I am Lieutenant Commander Lewis of the U.S. Navy, the officer that you surrendered to. We're holding this meeting to field questions and explain a few things. He nodded to the tech, who tapped a button and brought up the first slide. Lewis shook his head for a moment as he looked at the font, the color choice, wondering where the hell the tech had gone to school. Right. First off, we can't feed or house more than a few of you. My ship isn't made for that, and since your ship lacks skip drive capacity, you have to wait here until we figure out what to do with you. Questions. One of the space hamsters raised his hand. How will we get supplies? How were you getting them before? The local colony sent us food. Well, I guess you'll have to use what you have until we can get supplies out here for you. What if the local colony surrendered? Then they could resume sending supplies, I guess. Oh, in that case they surrender. Lewis blinked at the space hamster. It was in the 1800s-style uniform, complete with a fancy frilly hat. It's a kitchen colony. You can't just expect them to follow your commands, Lewis said with a shake of his head. Oh, that's my cue. The kitchen stepped forward. If he had to say, it looked like a tuxedo cat with a monocle and a white moustache. No, wait. That was just white fur. No. Wait, yes? Fur. He was also wearing an actual tuxedo and a top hat. I'm in charge of the colony in question. We surrender also. You were on the ship? Oh, no, we arrived a short time ago since we heard you were here. Lewis looked at the Marine lieutenant who just shrugged. Okay, so, then the colony can keep sending you food. There were nods of agreement from the crowd, and Lewis frowned as he saw his tech drawing something before putting it up on the projector. It was a decent drawing of a planet and a shuttle with an arrow moving towards the rough drawing of a ship. So that was it. His tech was an art major. He made a mental note to leave the tech behind with the Marines and to get a new one. The next question you had is if you can move to one of our colonies and live out the war in a prison camp where you didn't have to fight. This seems to be a very pressing question you have, and unfortunately the answer is no. There were groans, and he heard a few of the scattered people asking why not. This is because all our colonies are death worlds. Everything got quiet. All of them? Asked the hamster up front. Yes, every single one of them. We give the garden planets and the like to the UHG, so instead we're probably just going to make a prison camp on your colony here, and that's where you'll live. They all seemed to nod at that as well. He saw that the tech scribbled something else out, and then put up a picture of a camp with hamsters and cats in it. Lewis rolled his eyes for a moment, but now wasn't the time to wonder how he had ended up with an art major for a tech. What about meals? Asked another of the overly fancy uniformed hamsters. What? We just went over this. You'll just keep getting food from the colony. That was for food in general, yes, but will we still get to eat 5 meals per day? Lewis arched a brow in a mixture of surprise and confusion, but then he realized he didn't know how big their meals were or how long the day was, so he wasn't sure if it was little or a lot. And what about naps? Asked one of the kitchens. Well, we haven't figured out the logistics, obviously. I assume if you took naps and ate 5 times a day here on the ship, then you can keep doing that down on the colony. Soon there was a picture of a cat napping in the sun and a hamster eating what he thought was a cake. Lewis wasn't sure if the art from the tech was helping, or just trying to make the most out of his likely wasted education. As our prisoners, of course, you'll be treated fairly. And, obviously, since there are far more of you than there are of us, it'll take some time to get things going. Would it help if we made the prison camp? One of the kitchens asked. Lewis looked around the hangar bay at all the mistakes that he could see. Can you build a prison camp easily? I mean, if we're allowed to build it like we do normal buildings, sure. The spaceship is really hard, though, since we were using designs that we weren't familiar with. Yeah, I've been meaning to ask about that. Weren't the hamsters helping you build it? Of course, but we've never built one before. The council didn't really think we could, but the kitchens were willing to help us, so we mostly paid for it and designed it and oversaw the construction, said one of the fancier hamsters. So none of you have actually built a ship like this. They shook their heads. Well, that explains a few things. Sure, I guess you can build the prison camp too. One of the fancy-dressed kitchens this time raised a hand. Yes? How come you aren't dressed like us? Lewis frowned at that and looked down at his uniform. It was just a standard light military pressure suit. He hadn't been willing to change into his formals or even garrison uniform when entering a captive dreadnought. Why would I be? Well, our uniforms are based on what we found on your planet a while back. They had the fanciest pants that we'd ever seen. The hamster, with an additional mutton chop fur, said with a nod, as the kitchen seemed to agree. It's impractical. You guys based your uniforms on ours because they were really fancy. More nodding. Well, we don't wear those anymore. Any other questions? When do we get to meet the one who will deliver us? What? The human who will deliver us. The great deliverer. I have no idea who you're talking about. Surely you must. There was a murmuring amongst the crowd as they seemed a little concerned over the lack of knowledge. Lewis was obviously confused, and then he saw a kitchen hand his tech something, and then the crowd all grew hushed at the picture on the screen behind him. It was a picture of a longhorn and some sort of motto. Your delivery guaranteed, or my name isn't Billy Bob, Space Trucker. Emily was slowly shaking her head as she stood in the cargo bay. What are you doing? Wax on, wax off. Billy Bob was still in the Borg power suit, having spent one of her sleep cycles practicing on the thing. Now he was making strange motions with his limb. Crane! Kick! He popped a foot and lashed out. Danielson! Hee-yah! He made a chopping motion with his hands, and then stopped, arms rising at a strange square angle. Hey, Emily, what am I? She blinked as she watched him start to move under a jerky, rough motion. She couldn't tell if it looked like he was being controlled by strings or some sort of automated program. A puppet? What? No, come on! He turned his upper body and kept moving with those strange, jerky movements. I don't know, Billy Bob, she said as she rested one of the hands on her cheek as she watched him. Here's a hint. Domo arigato. That doesn't translate. Domo arigato, Mr. Roboto. Emily, come on! He started to sing, of course, being off key. Domo arigato, Mr. Roboto. I am a modern man. Secret, I got a secret. He stopped then and sighed before turning on the speakers hidden in the fur suit. When the actual song started to play, Emily let out a slow sound of understanding. Oh, the song! Yeah, what else would I be referring to? Come on, Space Assassin, you gotta give up. Here I've been practicing for ages now. Watch what I can do. He stood up in front of his longhorn and shifted rapidly from foot to foot for a moment, wiggling and waving his hands as seemed to get ready. And then he crouched down and jumped, only to sail up into the ceiling of the cargo bay, letting out a rather unmanly squeal of surprise as he came crashing down onto the other side of his ship with a heavy thud. Billy Bob! Emily rushed over, but the human in the Borg suit was pushing himself back up, waving her off. No, I'm okay. I just forgot I practiced in my gravity and then unloaded it before you got up. Nothing serious. He brushed himself off and then started to lean one way and then the other to stretch out. I'm getting the hang of it. She was crossing all of her arms as she looked at him. So, it would seem, you haven't left that thing in hours, so I'd expect you to get better. I need to test other things, though, like coordination. He looked around then and moved over to some empty crates that had been left over from the original owners of the Rosie. He started to lay them out and looked back over his shoulder. Can you get me some stuff to drink on the Longhorn? Wait, do space hamsters drink space tea? A very, very weakened version of it compared to our tastes, she said as she rubbed her chin and then shrugged. Sure, brew that up and come back here when it's done. Why don't you? 'Cause Mittens will freak out if she sees a Borg. Emily nodded at that and then stepped into the Longhorn, leaving Billy Bob behind. She pulled out the tea, setting it and brewing a very weak version of it, and she'd been asked. When she stepped back outside with the pot of weak tea on a tray and a few of his cups, she found Billy Bob had set up the crates as a rough collection of chairs around a table that had a council senator as the chief sneaky busybody sitting around it. What are we all doing, Billy Bob? She asked, looking around with a bit of confusion. Surely you must know what this is doing, oh diplomat. She shook her head. A tea party, but not of the Boston kind. The others all stared at him. Don't worry about it. Emily moved forward, setting the tray down on the crate. She started to reach out for the pot and Billy Bob waved her off. Slowly, he closed in and opened his hand and delicately picked up the pot, shaking a little before he poured some of the tea into a cup. And then he picked up the cup with 2 blue fingers as he held it up for the consular. Oh, I say, most splendid. Are there any scrumdiddles or flufferpillows? I don't know what those are, so no. Oh, most bothersome. Can we get some? Sure. The counselor set his cup down and got up to find whatever the hell he wanted. Billy Bob poured out the second cup for the chief sneaky busybody, who had looked a bit nervous as Billy Bob in the Borg suit moved the cup filled with hot liquid over to him. The cup rattled a little as Billy Bob probably overthought the controls. And then he released it gently as the spy visibly relaxed. Thank you. Do you mind if I also go get some treats? No. You sit and wait. We need to keep the tea party rolling. In fact, let's kick this up a notch. He picked up one of the remaining cups, handing it to Emily empty, and then he picked up the teapot, the little rattling a little as he moved it over her lap as he clutched the cup. She shifted a little as he leaned over at her with the hot teapot, his hand shifting and shaking a little, but she moved the cup to follow it, and soon the cup had weak tea. "Look at that! Look at how good I am!" He leaned back and cheered, the tea of the pot flying from his hands and into the air. Hot tea flying out in Emily, and the hamster squealed and dived to avoid it. Billy Bob cursed and moved to catch it, hopping a bit and catching the foot on the edge of the crate as he fell onto his face. Arm outstretched as he caught the teapot. "Still got it." Bravo, bravo! The chief, Fancy Pants, had returned with a bag full of pastries, which he was stuffing into his mouth, crumbs tumbling down his chin. The spy quickly scurried over to grab a few of the pastries as Emily stood back up while dusting himself off. "Okay, maybe tea party was a bad idea, but I'm really getting the hang of this thing," Billy Bob said as he looked around the cargo bay, as if trying to find something else to test himself with. "All right, we get it. You're getting good. Just get out of there already," Emily said to Billy Bob as she sighed. All right, enough of the suit today, I guess." The hatch opened in the back and he had to squirm and wiggle his way out, getting his upper body out first before looking around, hanging partially from the suit. Wait, how, He was a very dense creature from a super heavy gravity planet. There wasn't a person on the ship who could help him pull him free. He tried to sit up further, hugging the head of the fake Bork, his upper body free, and he wasn't sure how to pull his legs out, and not just fall to the ground. Oh, I know! There was a chime through the cargo bay as the flashing lights of the gravity turned off. Emily squawked out while the hamsters squeaked, arms flailing as they tried to grab the pastries that were floating away from their bag. Billy Bob quickly pulled his legs out of the suit and righted himself with a smile. Emily had extended her wings for a moment and smiled, jumping up into the air to scoop the floating hamsters, her wings flapping as she easily moved through the zero-G environment. Then she looked down as Billy Bob waved his hands. "Toss 'em to me." "Billy Bob, I don't know how to aim. Just try it. I'll catch 'em." "Oh, jolly good, to sail through the air like a snickerblat. It's such fun." Emily shrugged and then flapped her wings and held steady, and then Pot tossed. Pot shoved the Fancy Pants hamster down at Billy Bob. He pushed off his suit lightly and floated to catch the hamster, who was laughing as he held his top hat in place while flailing. "Now the other one," Billy Bob said, clutching the first hamster in a single-armed hug. "Please don't, I'm a little nauseous." But Emily was already trying to aim as she tossed and shoved the hamster down towards Billy Bob. As he spun through the air, the chief sneaky busybody squeaked and then threw up, blops of pastry flying out of his mouth. They jiggled and wobbled in zero-G as Billy Bob and Fancy Pants had a horrified look on their faces before Billy Bob dived out of the way. The hamster hit the deck, bouncing off of it lightly, since they were still on zero-G, the vomit floating above him, and then there was a warning throughout the ship for some reason that Rosie had to shift the power. So gravity came back on, and the spy squealed just before the blob's eaten pastry rained down upon him. A voice came over the PA. "The Libertonian ship was a little closer than expected. Sorry for the evasive maneuver. We'll be docking with them shortly." Emily guided back down to the ground and walked over to Billy Bob and the Fancy Pants, looking down at the other hamster who was lying on the ground looking, worse for wear. A bit of sticky wicky wookit, but no harm. A nice shower will cheer you up. "Yeah, I'll take him to the crew's locker room," Billy Bob said, and carefully picking up the fluffy spy, avoiding the sticky bits. Emily moved a few crates around while he was gone to cover up the few leftover blobs of mess. It wouldn't look good till the other Libertonians started asking what the hell was going on, and the Rosie before they got there. Soon enough, Billy Bob returned with a smile. "This is kind of exciting. I've never actually met other Libertonians. Now I get to compare you to everyone else from your species." Emily blinked at that and looked him over with a mixture of confusion and anxiety. Seeing her expression, he just laughed as she shook his head. "Don't look so worried. I already picked you on a comparison against all females of my species that I know. You'll do fine." They waited as they heard the boarding tube extend, much as it had in the Space Goblins the day before. But this time, the figures that had stepped out were much taller, their figures cloaked with the shadowy black suits that Billy Bob had first seen Emily in. He realized now that she wasn't lying about being shorter than most of her kin. They were all about several inches taller than her. Their wing colors were various shades and patterns, but they all had black tips. Emily seemed to recognize them, and despite their masks, however. "Jonas, so good to see you again. You must be in charge then," she said, stepping forward towards one of the big figures. But before he could respond, another voice came from the back of the group. "Wrong as usual, Emily. I'm in charge here." The other stepped away from the another female figure stepped forward. She seemed to be about the same height as Emily, despite the taller ones around them. "Amelia! But if you're here, who's guarding Hal? You're lucky that they's even let you do more than mop up floors. How you ever managed to graduate from the academy is a mystery to me. That's because you're a horrible spy. You're probably still confused why no one took you to the dance. Clearly, it was because your colors are drab and your feathers are sparse." The Libertonian's wings shifted at that, the feathers obviously ruffled in the implication. She reached up and pulled her mask free, revealing a crimson-colored feathers and blue eyes that briefly made Billy Bob wonder if she had been eating the spiced melanga. She walked towards Billy Bob, running a hand along his chin, for a moment before turning back to Emily, her wings smacking Billy Bob in the face for a moment as he closed his eyes. "So this is the famous human you found. He's easy on the eyes. It would be a shame if my superior coloring and skills of enticing him to leave you." Billy Bob didn't even have time to curse before both women had their gloves off, those razor-sharp talons bare, their wings spreading wide. But unlike the last time where Emily tried to keep between him and her, the target that they started to circle one another. They made those strange chirps as they moved. The other Libertonians hadn't really reacted and just backed up, standing near his longhorn before one of the males waved him over. "Hello, I'm Jonas. It's nice to meet you." "Hi, I'm Billy Bob." He held his fist out and was about to explain when Thomas actually gave him a fist bump without coaching. "Well, damn, is human culture catching on with you guys?" With your normal form of greeting involves crushing our hands in display of strength, we find alternative ways of greeting you." Billy Bob nodded at that, and then watched Emily and Amelia snap at one another. The red feathers Emily had only bared in her display back with the CIA agent, were on display, and Amelia's red wings with the black tips were displaying bright blue feathers amongst the red. Is this normal? For them it is. Should we stop them? I'm not getting involved. I don't feel like getting a face full of talons. Besides, they're young. Let them fight him out. The Libertonian shrugged and crossed his arms. Wait, if they're young, how did they both get such important jobs? Jonas shrugged for a moment. Well, when you're good at killing people, and you come from families like those, you just get promoted pretty quickly. I guess we should try and stop the fight, though. We need to discuss getting the two of you down to the planet. Well, I have an idea. Do you have one of those other super fancy pocket dimensions? The Libertonian unhooked one of those strange devices from his belt. Holding it out, Billy Bob touched the activation button to get the blue glow going. Hey, you two, I'm jumping into another dimension now. He leaned into the blue tear, and his body seemed to get sucked into it. Emily and Amelia stopped as they looked over, wings quickly lowering. Wait, but that'll kill him, Amelia said, obviously confused. Emily let out an annoying chirp. No, apparently he can survive. She walked over, looking down into the light. Billy Bob, you get out here right now. I swear, I have to keep an eye on him if he gets into all kinds of trouble. Amelia stood next to her, looking down at the blue void. Billy Bob, can you hear us? Hello, human. Inside the dimension, Billy Bob was floating in the same blue stuff. Looking around, he saw some sort of strange device. And then his eyebrows arched up in surprise as he began swimming towards the object that he spotted. And so ends another chapter in the adventures of Billy Bob, Space Trucker.